Thanks very much. This next moment is the moment of the reflection, or the sermon as we called it in the past. I want to take a moment as an introduction here to say that today I am wearing a stole, a sort of a reference to the ministry. And my ministry is coming to an end in a couple of weeks, and this may be the last time that the content of the sermon is sufficiently serious enough to sport the stole. But also, I want this part recorded. I hope I've delayed long enough, Janine, in your recording, because I want to make sure for posterity that I say thank you to Elizabeth, my sister, for making me this stole. I'm wearing it, and I wanted you to know. So, good morning, everybody. I want to start with reminding you that I have given this sermon before, and I have adapted it for a second go around here today. But in much of my writing, I like to repeat a beginning stanza at the end of a poem, and I feel that 3 years ago I started this, and now I'm repeating this first stanza at the end of this tenure. So, I think that we often use the term religiously liberal just too liberally. Sometimes folks conflate religiously liberal with politically liberal. You've probably heard this kind of blurred statement in an otherwise conservative community for liberals. Another frequent connotation is that to be religiously liberal, there are no confines to such religious thought. It's this catch as catch can, anything goes, and seriously, taken to its extreme, nothing in this idea is expected of the religiously liberal. Unitarian Universalism is a religiously liberal movement. James Luther Adams, a Unitarian minister and professor, was arguably the leading Unitarian theologian in the 20th century, and he worked mightily to make sense of what it was or it is to be religiously liberal. Now, as I said, I shared the first part of today's talk in July of 2018. It was my first talk with you all. I set it up then that we weren't going to figure out all that is religiously liberal in one 15-minute morning talk. And I feel I have revisited, and maybe to some of you too redundantly, but I've revisited this topic many times in the last 3 years in different ways, in different talks with you. Initially, I had hoped to introduce you to Adam's thought and how it all relates to this fellowship. There are many people who didn't hear this the first time, so that mission holds true for those folks still today. Adams was raised in a profoundly fundamentalist Christian home. He had a powerful shaping experience as a visiting minister in Germany during the rise of Nazism, and he was a dense philosophical thinker and writer. Gratefully, Adams sometimes used concrete language to describe institutions and events when delivering his thoughts. There really is no better example of his accessible writing than his 5 Smooth Stones of Religious Liberalism. I thank Miriam for taking us through the 1 Samuel account of David and Goliath, the story from 1 Samuel, where David goes to meet Goliath in battle with nothing but 5 smooth stones he had collected from the stream bed. And in the end, David defeats Goliath with only 1 stone. He didn't need armor, he didn't need shields and swords, and he didn't need to be a giant. He only needed his faith. Adams invokes the 5 smooth stones as a way of succinctly defining what is religiously liberal, and he is offering us our own pouch of stones as we go forward as UUs. Given our time, I am going to read Adams' original writing and then offer a quick distillation of each of his ideas. Remember, as you hear Adams's words, this is the accessible Adams. So the first stone. Religious liberalism depends on the principle that revelation is continuous. Religious liberalism depends on the principle that revelation is continuous. The simple reading of what Adams is saying is that our religious tradition is a living tradition because we are always learning new truths. I think you could live a full life and think of this as Adams' warning against dogma, against the zeal of certitude. It's reworking to an openness to continuous revelation. I will admit, I must say, I really like this stone. I fully accept the anti-dogma statement, but I've found it is more exciting than just that. I believe continuous revelation is a portal to the sacred. Again, there is at least a whole sermon in that idea, and I'll admit to you right now, I didn't write that for you in the last 3 years, but I'll come back at a guest moment sometime in the future if you want me to, and I'll deliver the talk on the continuous revelation as a portal to the sacred. But for a guy who for many decades lived without active connection to the sacred, I found my musing on continuous revelation really did lead to new understandings, including things holy. The second stone. All relations between persons ought to rest on mutual free consent and not on coercion. All relations between persons ought ideally rest on mutual free consent and not coercion. Mutual consent is the antithesis of doctrinaire interpretations of faith that define how you must believe to get into heaven. Many of us here have personal experience with the coercive nature of some other belief systems. I figure this one resonates pretty well with us. The religiously liberal model does not include the coercive imperative that you will go to hell if you don't believe in a defined manner. The third stone. Religious liberalism affirms the moral obligation to direct one's effort toward the establishment of a just and loving community. It is this which makes the role of the prophet central and indispensable in liberalism. So there's a couple of big pieces combined into one stone. Let's start with the first half. Religious liberalism affirms the moral obligation to direct one's effort toward the establishment of a just and loving community. When you cross our UU threshold, either virtually or in person, but when you enter a UU service, you are walking into a body of people committed to and actively pursuing the development of a just and loving community. We may be a refuge for individuals seeking personal discovery and solace from a coercive religious world, but more than that, we are committed to justice seeking. This work goes on all week long, not just on Sunday mornings, and not just working on ourselves. We are committed to building community with others. The second part, it is this which makes the role of the prophet central and indispensable in liberalism. Prophecy for Adams is essential to religious liberalism, and it is the creative edge within our tradition. He recognizes our obligation to interpret the signs of our times and move us toward the ideal rather than the popular. In his time, Adams saw the rise of fascism and communism as examples of cultural religions. I think we are living in times that also call on us to be prophetic, to be a creative edge in the face of popular injustices. The fourth stone. We deny the Immaculate Conception of virtue and affirm the necessity of social incarnation. We deny the Immaculate Conception of virtue and affirm the necessity of social incarnation. I'm guessing, if I had you raise your hands, you'd probably all raise your hands. How many of you just got hung up on the term Immaculate Conception? I think Adams is playing with our sensibilities. I think this simply means good things don't just happen. People make them happen. You don't immaculately conceive good stuff. You gotta go make it. For me, this also establishes the idea of agency. We have the capacity to act, to control the resources and events in our lives. And that agency is made real when we work together with others. Social incarnation. The fifth stone. Liberalism holds that the resources, divine and human, that are available for the achievement of meaningful change justify an attitude of ultimate optimism. Liberalism holds that the resources, divine and human, that are available for the achievement of meaningful change justify an attitude of ultimate optimism. Truth be told, this rivals the first stone as my favorite. If the first stone offers us a life of continuous revelation and my portal to the sacred, the fifth stone declares that we have good reason to be optimistic. This echoes what the thought of another Unitarian minister, Theodore Parker, who in 1853 wrote 10 sermons that were focused on justice and conscience. And through those sermons, Parker was wrangling his ideas in the abolition of slavery, a prophetic wrangling that he was doing there. In one of those sermons, he wrote, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by the experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure it bends toward justice." That is a blend of the prophetic, stone 3, and the optimistic in stone 5. Parker, Adams, and UUs today live in this blend. We are, as Parker and Adams did before, grabbing on that arc and pulling it toward justice, not just with optimism, but with work. At this point in my original delivery of the sermon, I offered an example of an Arizona congregation which I had worked with and their work to form a social justice ministry. And I described that a relatively small congregation could make a move toward working with others and to forge a beloved community. It's a good story. And I think it's one that is also unfolding here at KUUF. But to close today's version of the talk, I want to acknowledge the 3 years that have passed since I first delivered it. They have been tumultuous for the Unitarian Universalist Association and for the country as a whole, as we all understand. But with the UUA, it's within those 3 years that we have undertaken a serious effort to conduct an audit of white privilege and the structure of power within Unitarian Universalism, and analyze structural racism and white supremacy culture within the UUA. Coming out of that work, a theological reorientation has emerged. We are engaged in transforming liberalism and generating a new understanding of liberationalism. I believe the next several years, we will be called on to learn what liberation theology means in the Unitarian Universalist context in the 21st century. We have seen glimpses of it, and I know there will be more to come, and I look forward to the liberation theology offerings that will be shared through the UUA and hopefully a future minister at KUUF. Certainly, our religiously liberal past will be recognized as a part of our religious legacy and in some ways be part of our transformed future. Just as a couple weeks ago, we heard from Reverend Sophia Betancourt as she invoked the concept of collective salvation. She lifted up the thought of Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, a Unitarian who in 1866 insisted that we are all bound up together in one great bundle of humanity, and society cannot trample on the weakest of its members without receiving the curse in its own soul. Adams in the 1950s included the spirit of being bound up together in his sense of the social incarnation of good and the building of our beloved community. Reverend Betancourt and other leaders in the current work of transforming our liberal tradition into liberationalism of the future have begun to mine our past resources with an eye toward our future. With that in mind, I think it's fitting that my ministry ends. And at this next to last reflection that I offer you, that I reference that past legacy, lifting up the thought of folks like Adams and Parker. And at the same time, I'm calling on us to look forward, to recognize ours as a living faith, a faith of continuous revelation. And may this work inspire us to keep dreaming big, to keep moving forward, to keep organizing for liberation, and to keep answering the call for love and justice. Thank you.